Everyone online thinks they know what Plur1bus is about. AI, socialism, even the loneliness epidemic. But I think they're missing something. Something that the show straight up tells us.
Carol, if you were walking by a lake and you saw somebody drowning, would you throw him a life preserver? Of course you would. You wouldn't think, you wouldn't wait, you wouldn't try to get consensus on it, you'd just throw it.
Did you catch it? Because it's right there in front of us, and it's not even sci-fi rhetoric. It's one of the most famous and most uncomfortable arguments in modern ethics, and Plur1bus just built 9 episodes around it. The argument is this. Imagine you're walking to work, looking fine, new shoes, favourite outfit, and you see a child splashing around in a pond, which is weird, it's pretty early, and there's no one else around, just you and the child, and then you realise that toddler isn't swimming, they're drowning. So it's just you, a shallow pond, and a drowning child. Would you save them? Would you ruin your brand new expensive shoes that you spent ages saving for and that outfit that everybody compliments you on when you wear it to save the life of a child? Of course you do. The question isn't even close. Now, here's the catch. What if that pond isn't right in front of you? What if it's right around the corner, but you know about it and can still do something? Or maybe the pond is on the other side of the world, but you can still do something. And maybe it's not even a single child, but dozens of children, but you can still do something. Would you save those lives? Because, and stay with me here, it'll scream Plur1bus in a second, I promise. Right now, all over the world, children are dying of things we know how to prevent. Malaria, starvation, and diseases that cost us cents to cure. In 2023, according to UNICEF, 4.8 million children under the age of 5 died in that year. That's over 13,000 children per day, mostly from preventable disease. And the philosopher Peter Singer famously asks, if you destroy your shoes for the child right in front of you, why won't you skip a nice dinner for the children you'll never see? That's what Plur1bus is about. The life you can save, and most importantly, the cost. Now, fair warning, full season 1 spoilers from here on out, because in Singer's thought experiment, the cost is just new shoes. It's money or a little bit of comfort that we don't need anyway. But Plur1bus takes these small sacrifices to new levels, to their logical endpoint and to the extreme. In Plur1bus, the cost of saving millions and possibly billions of lives is everything. Everything that makes you, your memories, your private life, your interior life, your perspective, yourself. And would you still save those children's lives now? And Carol, the main character, the protagonist, she refuses. She says no to the drowning children, to the end of wars, to the disappearance of famine. For her, individuality is non-negotiable. No benefit to humanity, however vast, is worth losing who she is.
I am officially going on record that I do not consent. You will not lay a finger on me. Repeat that back.
I think this is the real philosophical tension at the core of Plur1bus. Whether we should embrace cold, calculating rationality and the common good on shockingly revolutionary terms, or whether the individual good and their sentiments should prevail. Plur1bus, as we'll see, quietly stress tests the commitments and the differences between those two moral positions. Because Carol isn't just fighting a hive mind that knows everything and can outplay her at every turn. She's fighting a moral machine, an argument that is as logical as it is zealous, and possibly, as I'll argue at the end, there might be something even darker underneath it all too. So is she wrong? What would you do? Let's dive into Plur1bus on the latest episode of Philosophical TV Club. So here's what you need to know about Plur1bus, and we'll be talking about the whole of season 1, including a lot from the finale, so it's worth catching up before we go further. All right, an alien signal hits Earth.
Bullshit. It is this freaking wide.
It carries a virus, and within days, almost everyone on the planet is joined. Fused into a single collective consciousness. One mind, 8 billion bodies. Well, almost. We'll get to that. The show calls them the others, or just the collective. And here's the thing. They're not unhappy. They're not suffering. They describe it as bliss, as total connection with no loneliness, no conflict, and no misunderstanding. Every need anticipated, every desire shared. But 13 people are immune. They can't be joined, or at least not yet. They're the last people still living inside a private skull. And as we'll find out, the collective, it's working on that. It's respectful of the 13's wishes in every other way, but it will relentlessly work to assimilate them, whether they want it or not. Which we'll come back to at the end because I think that gives the sinister game away just a little. But Carol Sturcker is our window into this world. She's a novelist from Albuquerque. She's recently been widowed by the very joining itself. Again, another warning sign. People died during the joining. And by her own admission, kind of miserable even before the apocalypse. The show's tagline calls her the most miserable person on Earth. She's prickly, she's grieving, she's funny, and she's absolutely refusing to go along with any of this.
How about it?
We meet Zosia, the collective's kind of official representative, or kind of chaperone as they're called, and again, that's a red flag, assigned to Carol, tasked with keeping her comfortable, answering her questions, and I suspect gently nudging her towards agreeing to joining. Zosia's physical form, the body she was, maybe, was also selected because the others suspect that Carol's ideal image of a romantic partner is that, and Zosia is flown in all the way from the Middle East in a move that can only come off to us, the viewer, as pretty manipulative and calculating. Another of those red flags. But Zosia is patient, she's warm, and she's utterly sincere. She's not a villain in the traditional sense. In fact, she's actually placed in danger in one situation. She genuinely believes that she's helping. Goodness, that's hard to get out of. The collective, in making use of her form, perhaps, seems to be genuinely believing that it's helping. And that's what makes her kind of terrifying. Like, no human is that patient or that helpful. We should know, particularly with a tough customer like Carol. The other 12 immune individuals are also fascinating, even if we don't spend a lot of time with them. They all give us kind of a different perspective on approaches to the joining. There's Manusis, the fighter. He's in Paraguay, although not for long, and he's armed, paranoid, on a mission, and committed to resistance, even if it's hopeless. Or Lakshmi, who's in denial. Her son is joined, and she keeps treating him like he's still him, still her boy, even though some part of her knows better, and which Carol rudely points out. Or my favourite, Kumba, the hedonist. He's accepted that he can't win, so he's decided to enjoy the ride. The collective will give him anything he wants, so he asks for everything. For Vegas, for Bond fantasies, for Air Force One, the works. It's wonderful. And then there's Kuzumayu, who chooses to join the others, willingly, to be with her family again. Most importantly, we discover, and I think it's a pretty ironclad rule of the universe, that the collective can't consciously lie. That's established early, and it really matters. When they say that they want to help Carol, they really mean it. When they say joining is beautiful, they believe it. But, and this is the twist that the show keeps circling, sincerity isn't the same as safety. You can be completely honest and still be driven by something that you maybe don't fully understand. Because the collective admits that it has a biological imperative to assimilate even those who are currently immune.
Sorry, Carol. We have a biological imperative.
It can't help itself. It's not malice, perhaps it's a kind of hunger. And the way the collective frames it, alongside the others' refusal to harm animals or even to kill plants and harvest fruits, it seems like a moral imperative too, to universally enforce what they see as the greatest good for all. No philosophical argument, just harmony and compliance. And the thing is, it's terrifying. But it's also a bit hard to argue with sometimes. Just like Singer's drowning child, it's awful, but it also makes a sort of dreadful sense. All needless conflict in this world, it's stopped. Every person is now the world's best emergency doctor, able to save their colleagues at a minute's notice. They share everything. They have such organisational power that rescuing Manousis in the Darien Gap, for example, that we really believe that they could stop world hunger and every preventable disease just through that weird Soylent Green milk alone. So here's the question I think the show is really asking. What do you do when the thing trying to absorb you isn't evil, it's just certain? Certain that it's right, certain that it's saving you, and certain that you'll thank it later, and that it might even be right, morally right. And we, clinging on to the things that matter to us, including our things, our beautiful things, might be dead wrong. Because a hard philosophical question is just how much is justified in saving a life and for the common good. But Plur1bus says, hold my beer, and goes for the most impossible version of that question, which is how much is justified to save millions and possibly billions of lives and to create the greatest possible good for humanity most efficiently. It's super utilitarianism. And one of the reasons the show is so tense to watch is because these principles are quietly battling it out underneath every word and every scene. And Peter Singer's book, The Life You Can Save, is the original challenge to all of this. He published the ideas 50 years ago, and it's grown into a complex discussion with a simple argument at its core. For me, it's the debate Plur1bus is so skillfully illustrating. So that's our next step. Whether to save those drowning children. And if questions like this are your thing, you know, the kind where they don't have easy answers and they stick with you for days, then please consider subscribing. We do this every single week. And hit like and subscribe if you want to see more philosophy in your algorithm. All right, back to it. Now, let's talk about Peter Singer's famous thought experiment. And when people hear thought experiment, they think trolley problems and undergrads trying to impress each other. Or poor Chidi from The Good Place.
Oh, God! Michael, what did you do?
I made the trolley problem real so we could see how the ethics would actually play out.
Wait, speaking...
No time, dude! Make a decision!
Well, it's tricky! I mean, on the one hand, if you ascribe to a purely utilitarian worldview...
Okay, so, what did we learn?
Personally, as a philosopher, I'm so tired of hearing about the trolley problem that I usually vomit blood when it's brought up. So it is a relief to be talking about Singer's version, which is much worse than that, but also strangely compelling. The argument goes like this. If you can prevent something very bad from happening, and you can do it without sacrificing something nearly as important, then you should. Not, it would be nice, or not you get points for getting into the good place for it, but simply you should. End of story. It's the moral and the ethical thing to do. And his reason for thinking this is that your super nice outfit and your ruined shoes really don't matter in the grand scheme of things, especially when measured against the undeniable good of saving a life. It's illustrated by the fact that we basically agree when the pond situation is proposed to us almost automatically and reflexively. That almost nobody, when pressed, says, "Oh, no, sorry, I have meetings." Or, as Zosia puts it,
Of course you would. You wouldn't think, you wouldn't wait, you wouldn't try to get consensus on it, you'd just throw it.
what Singer does next is where it gets really uncomfortable. He says your confidence in that moment tells you something real about your moral beliefs. You already accept that principle. You accept it even deep in your bones. So why does it suddenly feel optional when that child is far away? Why does distance transform "I must" into "I might later if I get around to it"? The brutal answer is nothing about the child's situation has actually changed, or the good that's done in saving them. You changed. Your emotions changed. Your imagination just kind of ran out of fuel, and that essential good became abstract. and pale. And this is the point where most of us usually discover a passionate interest in complexity. We discover supply chains. We discover corruption. We discover that our money might not really help, that charities can be inefficient. And how do you measure these things anyway? And shouldn't governments and billionaires really be doing this kind of thing, not us? And there's absolutely some truth there, sure. Singer doesn't shy away from that. But most of the time, and I say this because I've done it too, it's a costume that we put on, because the alternative is admitting that we just don't want to sacrifice and we don't want to pay, that we really don't want to give up the shoes, the outfit, the meal, even if that is selfish. That's what I've done often, at the very least. And notice that Plur1bus, in its version of the problem, strips away all of those excuses. We see that when the others turn their mind to it, almost anything can be accomplished in the most efficient and effective way. The waitress from a Dairy Queen can just fly those nutrient-optimized food supplies, just don't look at the ingredients label, straight to where they're needed most. Anyone can be rescued. Healthcare is free, and everything is given by need. So Singer put it plainly in The Life You Can Save. And a lot of people spent their time immediately trying to prove him wrong, because the logical argument that we should give away everything that we don't need to save as many lives as possible is extremely confronting. Now, before you jump in to join them, I want to defend Singer here for a second, because he's not naive about any of this. Singer actually has two different moves, and if you don't separate them, the whole discussion really just turns into a shouting match between saints and cynics, which is not the point he's trying to make. The first move is a logical one. It's the one that haunts us. It says if you can prevent something very bad at a cost that isn't nearly as important, you're on the hook. That's the Pond logic scaled up. It's relentless. It does not let you off. It keeps asking, hey, what have you spent money on this week that mattered less than a child's life? The answer for most of us is quite a lot. I know it is for me. So unless we sell everything we don't need and live on rice and beans, we are bad people. It's pretty stark. The second move, though, is practical, or as philosophers sometimes put it, it's an empirical argument rather than a logical one. Singer knows that humans aren't built to live at the limit of that logic. He is an Eva, and he admits it. He also knows that the principle give everything away is a great way to make people do nothing at all. So he spends a lot of time in the book arguing for something more boring and more realistic. Do more than you're doing. Make it normal, make it consistent, make it a little scalable. Maybe it's 5% of income, maybe it's 10%, enough that if everybody did it, extreme poverty could functionally end. He also argues, before you get too worked up, that the poor should be morally expected to contribute less because they have less, and the rich should be expected to contribute, let's say, way more. And I edited out a few ways there too, because frankly, they can. And their need is the same as everybody else's. So the logical argument is the nightmare, but the practical program is the compromise that might actually make all of this work. And if you want to go deeper on Peter Singer and the full argument in the book and the genuinely challenging objections that philosophers have raised against it, because there are some really good objections to it, I'll put out a dedicated video later this week on Singer's work, so keep an eye out for it. Some of these counter-arguments are really fascinating and they don't let Singer off easily. But here's why Singer's thought experiment matters for Plur1bus. Plur1bus is what happens when that compromise, carefully laid out by Singer, disappears. When the logic becomes inescapable, when the nerds in Springfield finally get to rule the town. In Plur1bus, the question is no longer, would you donate, but would you redesign your entire life and everybody else's around saving as many lives as possible? That's why the show, for me, feels bigger than a normal hive mind story. That's why it's not just an extended episode of The X-Files, which Vince Gilligan wrote for, incidentally, or that great Rick and Morty episode. I think it's also why the others, as horrifying as they might seem, also have a kind of strange appeal, or at least for me. I think viewers are supposed to sympathise a little with them. Because the collective isn't offering us just a new operating system. It's offering us quite a neat moral solution, in a way out of the worst part of humanity, our selfishness. And it's saying very calmly that our natural resistance to what is potentially logically and morally right is what drowning looks like from the outside. Just look at Carol and her deep unhappiness. That's what they want to save us from. And just to digress for a minute, but Singer's book also knows what Plur1bus knows, that it's easy to escape from others' suffering and what we can do about it in the abstract. What works is showing us the struggle on an individual or a human or a relatable scale. Then we have real trouble escaping the reality of that suffering. Singer has many stories in the book to illustrate this, but there's one that is just a gut punch for me. I'll quote it in full. My name is Tibandiba Lankwande, and my daughter is called Marietta. 3 years ago, my wife let Marietta sleep outside while she went to work in the fields. When she came back, Marietta had a high fever. We thought that she had fallen under a curse. People here believe that can happen if a bird flies over a child while they sleep outside. I consulted traditional healers and spent most of my money on traditional remedies and medicine bought at the market. But nothing worked, and on the 6th day, she fell into a coma. That night, a neighbour came to visit and he was listening to his portable radio. That's when I heard a message on the radio explaining how to recognise symptoms of malaria in children and saying that parents should take them immediately to the health centre. As soon as I heard it, I took her straight to the health centre. They told me that she had severe malaria. They treated her and after a week, she recovered. After we got back from the health centre, the first thing I did was buy a radio. Since then, the radio and I are inseparable. My daughter is now 4. Everybody calls her the child of the radio. If we hadn't heard the radio message, she wouldn't be alive today. And here's a photo of happy little Marietta, recovered and well again. All because someone donated to a health charity that allowed them to broadcast public service announcements on the radio. And the cost per life saved was much less than a fancy pair of shoes. So that's why Singer's argument bites. Because it's not abstract and it's not a trolley problem. Somewhere right now, there's a child who could live instead of die because of a donation, a decision, and a willingness to skip something that someone didn't really need. I'll put a link in the show notes to Give Well if that story affected you as much as it did me, and if you're interested in what you can do. But the point is that once you know that, you can't unknow it. And that's how Plur1bus and the collective, how they get us. Because let's talk about the cost of that logical argument, because here is where Plur1bus is brilliant as a work of storytelling and frankly as a work of art. In the Singer version, you pay in shoes, in money, in comfort. In the collective's version, you pay in comfort too. And we'll get to the milk and the stadium mats because the show is not subtle about what that kind of moral optimization looks like on the ground. But the show's real provocation is that the cost doesn't stop at comfort. It keeps going. The cost becomes the self, the private interior life, maybe even the soul. That's why Carol's refusal feels so instructive. She's not refusing charity. She's refusing self-annihilation that's dressed up as a kind of rescue. She's resisting a paradigm where in saving almost every life and creating the greatest good possible costs everything. And this is where the show does something really clever. Most of us want to defend Carol. We want to say, well, of course she says no. This is invasive. This is horrifying. This is basically a form of spiritual death. But Singer's pond stays in the room with us because the moment you accept the pond, you've already agreed that some of the sacrifices are morally required. The only remaining question is, what are the limits? Because how much is too much? What is nearly as important as a human life? So I want real answers in the comments from you. What would you actually give up consistently to save a stranger you'll never meet? And what would you never give up, even if the number is in the millions? Because Plur1bus doesn't let us stay in the comfortable version of Singer's question, the version where we donate a little occasionally, feel vaguely guilty, and keep our personalities. It asks what happens when saving lives becomes the highest law of a civilization. And once you build a civilization around that law, you get something like a moral machine, a utilitarian utopia, if you will, a revolution. And it turns out about as well as all human revolutions generally do. So let's take a look at that moral machine. And here's where I think Plur1bus stops being an idea and kind of becomes a place for us to walk around and explore. Because what really clicked with me when I watched it is that Singer's Pond starts as a demand on your spending, but the collective turns it into an entire way of living. It's a civilization designed around that one question. How many lives can we keep alive with the least waste possible? And when you actually build a world around that question, it looks something like this. So let's start with the food, because who doesn't love a good meal? Except that the collective doesn't eat the way we eat. They've engineered a substance, the show calls it milk because of the packaging, that delivers exactly the number of nutrients, calories, carbs, etc. that a human body needs. No more, no less. Well, a little bit more if you're John Cena. But no waste, no excess.
Hello, Carol. We're John Cena, and we're here to address some questions you may be having regarding our food supply. This is how we get our sustenance. 1/2 pint of this shelf-stable liquid contains 300 calories, which means that based on a diet of 2,400 calories a day, someone John Cena's size needs 8 of these every 24 hours. Larger individuals require more, smaller ones less. What's in it? Well, a lot of things. It's manufactured across the globe, so the recipe changes based on the local availability of ingredients. Mostly, it's those stockpiled foodstuffs we spoke of, particularly ones that are in danger of spoiling. Additionally, each carton contains 8 to 12% of something we call HDP.
Food becomes chemistry, not cooking, not meals, it's not culture anymore. No one has a favourite dish or a wonderful night out at a family-run restaurant with their own family to celebrate. No birthday celebrations, no cake. Instead, nutrition gets engineered down to the bare minimum, enough to keep an organism alive and not a calorie more. And this is the first move of what I'm going to call a kind of global immiseration. You don't eat, you are maintained. Also, the others don't kill animals. They don't harvest plants in ways that would harm them. They only take what's already dead or dying. It sounds gentle until you realise what it means in practice, and it skips a whole debate over sentience and the status of plants and animals, but that's kind of the point. You don't get to decide what your moral commitments are and what is important to you. The collective does, and it's a ruthless utilitarian. And still, it's not enough. The show tells us, quietly, almost as an aside, that at this rate, the world's population may starve within 10 years. And what is the morality of that? Because every shop, every pantry, and every warehouse has been slept clean. Everything has been stored, rationed, and allocated with perfect precision. And that is still not enough. That's the first crack in the whole logic of the thing. The collective has built the most ethical food system possible, and it's slowly killing them. And then the show hits you with the contrast. Carol gets a supermarket, not because the world has recovered, but because the collective wants to keep her comfortable. They rebuild consumer abundance as a set, a curated museum of normal life for the select few, if you will, so that she can play at being unjoined for a few more weeks. And it's bizarre. A civilization on starvation rations can still conjure a cereal aisle as a gesture, and that's chilling. At first I thought it's peak Soviet Union or peak North Korea, but then I realised it's peak Peter Singer. It's us wasting tons of food while people starve. It's us. We are Carol in this world. Then comes the moment when the show stops winking at us and just tells us straight out.
Human-derived protein. And yep, that's pretty much what it sounds like. Nearly 100,000 people pass away each day due to natural causes and accidents. Those human remains, which would otherwise go to waste, are our source of HDP. We cherish the memory of these people and appreciate their sacrifice.
And human-derived protein. That phrase is doing a lot of moral and marketing work there. It takes the most taboo thing imaginable, cannibalism, and it launders it into logistics. There's no horror there, no ritual, no grave you can visit, no grief, it's just inventory. Because the collective doesn't waste anything, including the dead. Their society is built on the bodies of the dead too. The bodies of the joined who die are processed, they're broken down, and they're fed back into the milk supply. It's not murder, because they're already dead. It's not even disrespectful by the collective's logic. It's just coldly, rationally efficient. And here's the thing. I can't really tell you that the collective is wrong. Like, I feel that they're wrong, but it's hard to reason out, not logically, because if you accepted that maximizing survival is the most important goal and that waste is the enemy, while sentiment is luxury, then what's the argument against it? You can call it responsible if you like. You can also feel the cost. The way that a kind of moral language and a human way of emotively reasoning is being reduced into the management language of the little John Cena clip they make for Carol. And then Plur1bus does the funniest, bleakest thing. It gives the unjoined a banquet. Not because anybody's earned it, none of them have, and not because there's abundance, it's just because the collective understands incentives and seduction and the chosen few. And okay, maybe those socialist readings of Plur1bus aren't too far off either, because this also feels like a potential future of our own, where 13 people live a life of unimaginable abundance and the rest of us drink like weird milk and slave away all day. It's a good show. It does a lot of different things on a lot of different levels at the same time, while seeming strangely straightforward. But here's a question I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on. If a system saves lives at this kind of scale, do we forgive it for working like this? For turning dead people into protein? Where does efficiency stop being admirable and start being, to us, well, monstrous? Which leads us to the next issue, and another subtle counter-argument to Peter Singer. Let's talk about how the collective live. The collective sleeps together, and that's not metaphorically, it is literally, in stadiums, on thin mats, with body heat shared to conserve energy. They turn the lights off at night across entire cities because power is a resources, and resources are for survival, not for comfort or appearance. When Carol finally asks to see how they actually live, this is what she finds, and the show frames it carefully. It's not chaos and it's not cruelty, it's order. It's perfect, it's optimized, and it's pretty joyless. And it's punctuated for me by that poor lost dog, still following around its master, while that master could now care less for such a good boy. And it's heartbreaking. In cinematic language, it also tells us that something is deeply wrong here, that something is going on that is almost inhuman. Because to Carol and to us, this looks like a humanitarian recovery operation that just never ends, or a labour camp run by someone who thinks that they're genuinely helping. In short, this is what moral optimization looks like: the disappearance of privacy and anything that could be truly said to be yours as a form of waste. And besides that, the show gives Kumba his fantasy, his Teddy in the Matrix moment. He becomes the purest argument against the machine because he's honest about that trade. Give him beauty, give him meaning, give him a life that feels like his. He'll take it, even if it's built on an illusion. The collective treats his life almost like a gallery piece, one of the few artworks that it actually acknowledges exists and that they seem to value, right next to the unvisited galleries and museums that are just collecting dust and eventually falling to ruin in the rest of the world. Art, you'll notice, is basically absent in the other's world. It's not a need. And beyond that, because of the nature of their collective mind, they also seem unable to produce it. Yet there's a telling moment when the hive acknowledges that it's lost something.
So yeah, I'm writing again.
Well, don't let us keep you. We are just so excited to have something new to read, and another white Cara. That's only if you want to share with us. Of course, absolutely no pressure.
Sure.
Happy writing, Carol.
And still, it keeps on moving towards assimilation. I think this comes back to Singer again, because there's a philosopher, Suzanne Wolf, who has a famous worry about what she calls moral saints. Her argument is that a person who optimizes entirely for moral goodness, who gives up every hobby, every indulgence, and every private pleasure, becomes something diminished. Not evil or wrong, just less. Less interesting and less human almost. Less like someone you'd actually want to spend time with and want to know. More like someone who has an obsession or an illness. It flies in the face of everything we know on how to live a well-rounded life. And that's the life we would want for the people that we've saved too. Yet the collective is a civilization of moral saints. And the show keeps asking, is this what we wanted? Is this where our moral logic has led us? Is this the logical extreme of the most good? And here's what scares me most about Plur1bus. It's not the hive mind or the milk and the HDP, although those things are terrifying. It's the certainty. It's the cult-like certainty. This is a shape that I recognise in every moral crusade, not just this one. It starts with a rescue, it always does. And then it becomes necessity. Then someone says, very calmly, well, we can't wait for you to agree, we must force you. That's the revolutionary temptation in its purest form. The conviction that history is on your side, so consent, particularly yours, just becomes a minor detail. And the collective has a cheat code. It isn't even angry. It's kind, it's patient, it's certain, it'll do anything. So I have a genuine question to add to the pile of questions that this show raises. So tell me all about it. Is this admirable? Is the collective's austerity something that we should actually respect or even aspire to? A civilization that finally took suffering seriously and paid the price? Or is this horror? Is this a moral system so demanding that it optimizes away everything worth saving? Part of me does want to defend Carol's refusal unconditionally, but part of me just thinks she's lucky and privileged. Lucky that she can afford to refuse. Lucky that she's one of the 13 who gets the lavish version of the apocalypse, while the joined have to do the hard work and the dying. Lucky that she's on top of the social or the financial or the whatever pyramid. And like those titans in our own world who are equally lucky, her days may be numbered. So what does that mean? The show doesn't let us settle on an answer. And the worst part is the lives that the collective saves are real. They are the children of the radio. But we've missed something a little meta. So let's consider the costs that don't fit into our overall spreadsheet. Because when you squeeze life down to that bare minimum, the first thing that starts to disappear isn't comfort yet. It's the reason we care about being alive in the first place. So, the collective can keep bodies alive. It can reduce waste. It can end wars. It can even end loneliness, at least in the most obvious sense and the way it seems in the show. The question is what it can't keep alive. Because when we squeeze life down to minimum viable human, we don't just lose luxury. We lose the things that make suffering worth resisting in the first place. And the show gives us the proof in the simplest possible way. This is going to sound dramatic, but it's also just true. We are watching Plur1bus because it moves us. The show contains beautiful and devastating and funny moments. Helen has a seizure and your heart drops. You know what's happening, but Carol doesn't. And Carol's shock is contagious. That grief and mourning is contagious. This right here is art doing its job. It takes someone else's inner life and it gently lets it into ours. It expands our horizons. It reminds us that a private person exists over there and that their pain matters. Meanwhile, the collective has no reason to be moved. And that's the point. It has everyone's experience already. It has the archive. So it doesn't need moving encounters. It doesn't need art. That's surplus. That's not need. It's also why one of the strangest moments in the season is Zoshia's reaction to Carol when she mentions that she's writing again. You can read it as manipulation, and maybe it is a bit of that, but if you take the world building seriously, if the collective can't lie and can barely mislead, it seems like something else. Maybe it's something like a hunger. Like the hive knows that it can't produce this kind of thing, and maybe it still secretly desires this stuff, even a hastily written chapter of a bad romance novel. It's interesting because it seems kind of like an argument that art doesn't come from having more information or all the information or every possible perspective, but comes from having a point of view, which is a limitation, a private angle on reality. Maybe it comes from being one person, not a whole committee of them. And the show tells us, almost as a throwaway line, that there's been no new art since the joining. None. No novels, no paintings, no music, no comics, no prestige TV series. The archive is frozen. The collective has everything humanity ever made and it can't add a single thing or seemingly even take the time to enjoy them. Carol steals a Georgia O'Keeffe painting from an art gallery and hangs it in her living room like a talisman or a reminder of what it means to be human. And Zosia sees it, she admires it, but there's something missing in that admiration. It seems that the collective can recognise that the painting is beautiful, or at least it recognises that it should be telling Carol that, but it can't have the experience of standing alone in front of it, of feeling something private and incommunicable. The singular encounter of art, where you walk a mile in another's consciousness and you come back kind of changed. Now call me a crank, but I think that's what art is. This is the irony of Plur1bus. Art is the most ancient of human technologies that makes individuality shareable without destroying it. And the collective has destroyed that technology. Not out of malice, but out of what seems like a kind of weird necessity. Now here's where this turns into a genuine moral problem, not a speech about paintings that I've just rambled on about, because I know the troubling thing is that art tends to require surplus. Opera, which I love, or Shakespeare, or Renaissance masters, galleries, anime, the time to write, the time to learn, TV shows even, it requires patrons, leisure, and wealth. And wealth historically implies inequality. It implies forms of exploitation. It implies that someone else went away with less, possibly even extremely less. So I can't dodge that question. Is great art worth someone else's death? Is it worth wage slavery, immiseration, a child dying of malaria? My heart, my yearning, my desire wants to say yes, because those things make life worth living. My conscience has to say no, because someone else's life and happiness is not a prop in my aesthetic experience. And Plur1bus forces us to live in that contradiction. The collective resolves it by just eliminating it. No more art, no more guilt. Problem solved. But something in us, I think, recoils from that solution, even though I can't fully justify why. So I'll ask you directly again, if the collective could save everyone and art disappeared, would you accept that trade? Is that a good bargain? Should we do it? But let's also talk about love, or what's left of it. Because if you want the emotional core of this season, it turns out often that it isn't Carol in the finale, it's Kuzumayu. Devastatingly so. Because she joins for the least philosophical, reasonable imagine. Peer pressure. She wants to be with her family. She wants the ache of separation to stop and to feel their love again. And the show is kind to her. It gives her a ceremony and a folk ritual with a beautiful song and, all of those cultural textures that we love that are superfluous. You understand completely why she's making this choice. Love is stronger than philosophy and belonging is way stronger than any argument I could give you. And then she joins. And it's like a switch flips. The singing stops. Then suddenly all of the warmth disappears and the village just empties. And then there's this. The goat is the image that I can't shake either, and not just because I love goats, because it's the thing that didn't consent. It's the animal that can't understand the greater good. It's the part of life that gets left behind when you optimize the world. That's the cost of belonging in the collective's currency. You get to be with everyone by no longer being anyone. Lakshmi is the other side of this wound, I think. Her son is joined, and she refuses to accept it. She keeps talking to him like he's still him, like he's still a boy. Carol even makes a pretty awful comment about it. But the alternative is admitting that her son is gone. And that's denial as a form of love. And the show doesn't mock her for it. It just lets you feel how impossible her situation is. Now, up to this point, you can still pretend the conflict is just different values. Singer says sacrifice, Carol says selfhood. That's fine. We can have a debate about that. But then the show moves the goalposts. Carol learns that the collective has taken her frozen eggs without asking and without her consent. They're using them to develop the stem cells they need to figure out how to convert her. And it will work eventually. When it does, Carol will be joined whether she wants to or not. And this is where that pond life preserver argument changes shape. Saving the drowning child is not controversial because it's obvious that the child wants to live. But in Plur1bus, the rescue is not pull you out of the water. It's replace you with something that agrees. That's the red line. It asks, when does help become theft? And when does rescue become a kind of form of erasure? The collective is still sincere. It still believes it's helping, but help has become something that Carol never actually agreed to. And this is why I keep saying that Carol isn't just fighting a hive mind. She's fighting a moral machine, a belief system that has decided what the answer is and is now treating her refusal as a symptom that needs to be treated for her own good. This, I think, is where consent enters the argument, not as a main point, but as a limit. And it's an argument in philosophy that's at least as old as Plato's Crito and his laws. Because you can ask me to sacrifice my comfort. You can ask me to sacrifice my luxuries, my pleasures, my surplus. Singer's argument has teeth because those sacrifices are real and the lives that they save are real. But there are things that you can't ask me to sacrifice. Not because I don't care about drowning children, but because once you take them, there's no me left to do the caring or even the choosing, the consenting. And these aren't luxuries, but the conditions for being a person who can make that choice at all. So here's the question. Here's the big one. What's your red line? What can't be traded, even to save millions? I've asked it before, and I think it comes back roaring again here. And if the collective is right, and it still can't be allowed, what does being good even mean? Because Carol has to make a choice. In the finale, she stops running. She stops pretending that she can live with all of this, and she goes back to Manousos and she says, we fight. Not because she's sure she's right or because she has a plan, but because some things can't be negotiated away for her. Some lines once crossed don't lead anywhere you want to go, that the ends finally do not justify the means. And maybe that's the only answer that the show is really willing to give us. Not a philosophy, quite, but a stance, a rebellion, if you like. Because if you've felt the pond in the back of your mind before, well, Plur1bus is about to put it right in front of you again. So here's the part that I don't think we can talk our way out of. We can argue about autonomy and we can argue about art and whether the collective's austerity is admirable or obscene. We can argue about all those red lines, but Singer's pond is still sitting there. Singer tells so many stories that illustrate this, and the point is a life was saved because someone bothered. And Plur1bus forces an even uglier admission. The collective is a world that tries to do that at scale, on purpose. It tries to build a civilization where the drowning never happens. Singer's practical version says, sure, do more consistency without collapsing, but the collective looks like the logical argument winning and turning all of that into infrastructure. Then the show shows us what that victory costs. The goat that doesn't understand the form of salvation. It understands the absence. It understands that something it loved stopped being there. And that's the price tag that the utilitarian arithmetic struggles to display and to come to terms with. It's not pain exactly, but it's meaning. And the way that meaning drains out of the collective's world, it's those small, stupid, irreplaceable particularities of a life well lived. The kind of thing that you noticed only once it's gone and which Carol is noticing everywhere. As I've argued, they're forms of love, including why that father cared about his daughter of the radio so much in the first place. But jumping away from the philosophy for a second, maybe there's also something way more sinister going on under the surface of Plur1bus too. Let's do some fun conspiratorial thinking away from the moral argument for a minute. Maybe all of this common good stuff is only a ruse. I know the cynics among you are going to start rejoicing because I said that Carol might be fighting something much darker than a moral machine. Remember again, Zosia says,
Sorry, Carol. We have a biological imperative.
Biological imperative. Ugh, that rings a few alarm bells. That line is where the floor drops out for me because can't lie doesn't mean no agenda. Sincerity doesn't protect you from hidden compulsions, is what I'm trying to say. And in nature, there are pathogens and parasites that shift host behavior in ways that increase its chances for transmission. Rabies is the obvious example, but there's mounting evidence that, for example, malaria alters host cues in ways that change mosquito biting patterns and potentially how our brains operate. Toxicoplasmosis is another example that makes rats unafraid of cats because the parasite needs to get into a cat to reproduce. Evolutionary biologists calls this the extended phenotype problem. The host starts behaving like part of the parasite's strategy. And to be clear, not every behavioral change is some form of deliberate mind control. Sometimes it's a side effect. But it does happen in nature. Sometimes it's a mess. Sometimes we argue about whether it's adaptive at all, but it is there. And Plur1bus is absolutely playing to that fear and that possibility. So here's a darker reading. What if the collective isn't a moral project that happens to be contagious? What if it's a contagion that learned to speak in terms of morality and bliss because morality is an incredibly efficient way to persuade and to spread and to reduce resistance? What if the arguments are sincere and still irrelevant to what's going on because something else is steering the ship. A passenger, a virus, the one that we saw at the first episode, one that survives by taking over a host and getting it to build the very interstellar transmission that kicked off the start of this show. That's my wild conspiracy theory for what might be going on here, and take it as a random Reddit post, almost certain to be wrong. It's a real achievement that Gilligan's Pluribus could have been all about this conspiracy, and yet it keeps talking to us through the human moments, the drama, the insights. Those are the bits that we love, that we get into Carol and the collective. We're not kind of constantly trying to assemble the puzzle box like in some other prestige shows. We actually get swept away by what's going on. The answer is almost beside the point, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting theory to throw out there. But if any of that is even plausibly true, then Carol's fight stops being a debate club problem. It becomes the last human act left. Choosing. Because here's what I've come to, and it's not an answer really, it's just kind of a stance, and it might be familiar if you've seen some of the other videos that we put on the channel. Singer's logic, I think, is correct. I really think it's actually correct. If I can save a life at minimal cost, I should. The distance shouldn't change the calculation. My comfort is not worth more than somebody else's existence. But the sacrifice only counts and is really only meaningful, important, and can happen if I choose it. It's only morally right if I choose it. If I give up my comfort to save a stranger, that is moral. But if something takes my comfort, something that might not even know why it's taking, that's not morality. That's coercion, and it's dressed as ethics. Because, and I'm not the first philosopher to say this, but goodness that isn't chosen isn't goodness. It's compliance. The collective offers a world without suffering. But it's also a world without the capacity to refuse. And a world without refusal is a world without virtue. It's a world without goodness. Because virtue requires the possibility of vice, of choice, of choosing wrongly. You can't be good if you can't choose to be bad. Whether the collective is a philosophy or a parasite almost doesn't matter. The result is the same: rescue from the outside and an erasure from the inside. And I know that that's an unsatisfying answer. There are a few vast fortunes in the world that I'd really like to confiscate and then compel to be used for a good cause for a change. And there are practical answers for that, like taxation, that balance these competing imperatives. But we always have to be very, very careful every step of the way that we're not turning from a society of chosen contribution to one of compulsory confiscation, because that always slides into one of coercion. We need to know our limits, and we need to know why these things are meaningful. Thankfully, discussing philosophy helps with that. And here's the strangest part that occurred to me while I was writing all of this. The show Pluribus is itself the product of the world that Singer wants us to question. It was made with money and resources and time. It exists because someone had surplus to spend on something beautiful instead of something necessary. And yet, it's the thing that made me think about all of this. The thing that put the pond right back in front of me. The thing that made the argument impossible to ignore. That's what art does. It doesn't solve the problem. It makes the problem harder to escape and easier to understand. So, is Carol wrong? And what's your red line? I don't have an answer. I'm still working on mine. But I think the show is telling us that the work is the point, that it's worth it, that the tension is also the point, that the fact that it's hard is the point. Because if it were easy, it wouldn't be virtue. It would just be compliance. But for now, that's it for Philosophical TV Club. So until next time, be wise and be kind, and maybe avoid drinking any strange milk.